Rain hammered the courthouse steps as Samantha Brooks pushed through the heavy glass doors, her breath coming fast, her heart pounding louder than the thunder rolling over downtown Atlanta. Her heels slipped slightly on the wet stone, but she didn't stop. Inside, the hallway buzzed with whispers that seemed to follow her like shadows. "Sam, wait!" Her mother's voice called behind her. Samantha didn't turn. At the end of the corridor, a man stood quietly beside a vending machine, his dark jacket damp from the storm, hands folded in front of him as if he had been waiting his whole life in that exact spot. Ethan Cole looked up when he saw her, calm and steady, while everything inside her felt like it was collapsing. "You came," he said softly. She swallowed, nodding. "I said I would." Behind her, the courthouse doors burst open again. Her father entered, breathless, face tight with disbelief. Her mother followed, clutching her purse like it could anchor reality back into place. "This is not happening," her father said, his voice low but trembling. "You're not throwing your life away today." Samantha closed her eyes for half a second, steadying herself. "I'm not throwing it away," she said. "I'm choosing it." Her mother looked Ethan up and down, her expression pained. "You barely know him." Ethan didn't respond. He simply stood there, composed, respectful, letting the storm of judgment pass over him. "I know enough," Samantha replied. Her father's jaw tightened. "He's a gardener, Samantha, a landscaper. You turned down a man who owns 3 tech firms for this." From the far end of the hallway, a familiar voice cut in. "You still have time to reconsider." Samantha turned. Jason Thomas stood near the entrance, umbrella dripping onto polished tile, his tailored suit untouched by the chaos around him. He had the look of a man who had never doubted his place in the world. "You don't have to do this," he said gently. "You deserve security, stability." Ethan's gaze remained forward, but his hand found Samantha's. Warm, steadying. She squeezed it. "I deserve honesty," she replied. Jason exhaled slowly, disappointment shadowing his face. "You'll regret this." Samantha turned away from him and faced the clerk's office door. "I'm ready," she said. Inside the small courtroom, 8 folding chairs sat in 2 neat rows. A judge adjusted her glasses and glanced at the couple with quiet curiosity. The fluorescent lights hummed softly above them. Outside, thunder cracked again. As Samantha and Ethan stood facing each other, the murmurs from their small audience felt distant, like echoes underwater. "Do you, Samantha Brooks, take Ethan Cole?" the judge began. Her father shifted in his seat. Her mother dabbed her eyes. Jason watched from the back, expression unreadable. Samantha's voice, when it came, was steady. "Ido." Ethan's answer was quiet but unwavering. "Ido." When the judge pronounced them married, the room remained silent for a beat too long. Then the rain intensified against the windows, as if the sky itself had something to say. Outside the courthouse, Samantha's mother reached for her hand. "You can still come home," she whispered. Samantha hugged her instead. "I am home." Her father didn't speak. He simply nodded once, a gesture filled with worry and love he didn't know how to express. Jason lingered a moment longer before stepping closer to Ethan. "You got lucky," he said quietly. Ethan met his gaze. "No," he replied. "I got honest." Jason studied him, as if trying to see beneath the surface, then walked away into the rain. Minutes later, Samantha sat in Ethan's aging pickup truck, watching the windshield wipers struggle against the downpour. The engine rattled softly as it warmed. She laughed suddenly, surprising herself. "What?" Ethan asked. "I just married a man during a thunderstorm with 8 witnesses and a vending machine behind him," she said. "This is not how my life was supposed to go." He smiled faintly. "Is that a bad thing?" She looked at him, really looked, and felt the noise of the world quiet. "No," she said. "It's the first thing that's felt right in a long time." They pulled onto the street, merging into traffic beneath the gray skyline. As they drove through the city, Ethan's phone buzzed in the cup holder. He glanced at the screen and silenced it immediately. She noticed. "Work?" she asked. "Something like that," he replied. The phone buzzed again. He turned it face down. Samantha watched him for a moment but didn't press further. Instead, she rested her head against the window and watched the city blur past. Towering cranes, half-finished structures, neighborhoods stitched together by ambition and concrete. At a red light, a black SUV rolled slowly to a stop beside them. The driver glanced toward Ethan, then gave a small nod of recognition before the light turned green and the vehicle moved on. Samantha straightened slightly. "Do you know him?" she asked. Ethan kept his eyes on the road.
No.
But his fingers tightened slightly on the steering wheel. They arrived at his apartment building 20 minutes later, a modest brick complex tucked between newer developments. The paint near the stairwell peeled, and the hallway smelled faintly of detergent and old carpet. Inside the apartment, everything was neat, intentional, simple. A small dining table, 2 chairs, a couch repaired carefully on one arm, a bookshelf filled not with novels but with binders, rolled plans, and thick volumes about land use and urban development. Samantha ran her fingers along one spine. "Zoning regulations?" she asked. Ethan removed his jacket. "Interesting reading." She smiled. "You are not like anyone I've ever met." He met her eyes. "I hope that's still true tomorrow." She stepped closer, resting her forehead lightly against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat while the storm rattled against the windows. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. Somewhere, construction machinery clanged against steel. The city moved, restless and growing. Inside, Samantha felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. But later that night, long after she fell asleep, Ethan stood by the window with his phone pressed to his ear, his voice low. "No," he said quietly. "Not yet." He listened. "I told you," he continued, gaze drifting toward the skyline glowing in the distance. "I'll return when it's finished." A pause. His expression hardened. "No one announces anything without my approval." He ended the call, set the phone down, and looked out over the sleeping city. A city that did not yet know his name. And in the bedroom behind him slept the only person who had never asked. If this opening already has your heart racing, hit the like button right now. And if you love emotional drama like this, subscribe. You do not want to miss where this goes. Morning sunlight slipped through the thin blinds, striping the bedroom wall with pale gold. Samantha stirred beneath the blankets, reaching across the mattress for warmth before remembering where she was. The unfamiliar ceiling, the faint hum of traffic below, the soft scent of detergent and rain lingering in the air. She opened her eyes and smiled. From the kitchen came the sound of a pan sizzling. She padded down the short hallway and stopped in the doorway. Ethan stood at the stove, wearing a faded gray t-shirt and dark jeans, moving with quiet efficiency as he flipped eggs in a skillet. Coffee steamed on the counter beside 2 mismatched mugs. "You cook?" she asked, leaning against the frame. He glanced over his shoulder. "You married me without confirming basic survival skills?" She laughed softly. "I may have overlooked a few details." He slid eggs onto plates and set them on the small table. "Sit." She did, watching him pour coffee. His movements were measured, calm, like a man who never rushed because he didn't need to. She took a sip and sighed. "Okay. If this is a poor gardener's life, I might survive." He raised an eyebrow. "High praise." Her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced down. "Mom." She hesitated, then answered. A pause. Her mother's voice sounded tired but gentler than yesterday. "Did you get home safe?" "Yes." Another pause. "Are you happy?" Samantha looked at Ethan. He was rinsing the pan, unaware of the question hanging in the air. "Yes," she said. "I am." Her mother exhaled. "Your father will come around. He just worries." "I know." "And Samantha?" "Yeah. You've always followed your heart. Just don't ignore reality." The call ended. Samantha sat quietly for a moment. Ethan set the pan aside and joined her. Everything okay? She's trying, Samantha said. That's something. He nodded once. It is. They ate in comfortable silence, punctuated by the soft scrape of forks and the distant rumble of the city waking. When they finished, Ethan gathered the plates. You don't have to, she began. I know, he said. I want to. She watched him wash dishes with methodical care. Most men I dated couldn't even load a dishwasher. He shrugged. Most men don't understand systems. She tilted her head. Systems. He dried his hands. Everything works better when each part is respected. Homes, cities, people. She studied him, intrigued. You think like an engineer. Landscaping teaches structure, he said. Drainage, foundation, soil movement, long-term growth. And relationships? She asked. He met her gaze. Those too. Her chest tightened with a warmth she didn't try to hide. Later that morning, they left the apartment together. Samantha adjusted the strap of her work bag while Ethan locked the door behind them. You're sure you don't mind dropping me? She asked. It's on the way, he replied. They descended the stairwell and stepped into the parking lot. A sleek black sedan sat idling across the street. The driver appeared to glance toward them before pulling away. Samantha frowned. That's the second time I've seen a car like that around you. Probably rideshare, Ethan said lightly. She studied his face. Calm, neutral, unbothered. She let it go. Traffic thickened as they entered the main road. Construction cranes dotted the skyline, skeletal arms reaching into the pale morning sky. Billboards advertised luxury condos, starting at $1.2 million, beside older brick buildings marked for redevelopment. Samantha watched workers in hard hats crossing an intersection. Atlanta is changing so fast, she said. Ethan nodded. Growth is inevitable. The question is who benefits from it. She looked at him. You sound like a city planner. He smiled faintly. I observe. They arrived at her office tower downtown. Glass and steel reflected the morning light, the lobby already buzzing with professionals moving with purpose. She hesitated before opening the door. You can still change your mind, he said quietly. She looked at him. About going to work? About any of it. She reached across the console and squeezed his hand. I chose you. I'm not reconsidering. Something softened in his expression. Something deeper than relief. She leaned over and kissed his cheek before stepping out. As she walked toward the building, she felt eyes on her. 2 co-workers stood near the entrance, whispering. One offered a tight smile. Inside, the elevator doors opened to the 18th floor. The marketing department buzzed with subdued chatter. Mrs. Cole, someone sang softly. Samantha turned to see Denise from HR leaning against a cubicle wall. Didn't expect you back so soon, Denise said. We thought you'd be honeymooning somewhere tropical. Samantha set her bag down. Courthouse weddings don't come with beach packages. A few polite laughs. Another coworker leaned closer. So, what does your husband do again? He manages landscaping contracts, Samantha said evenly. A pause. Oh, the woman replied, nodding slowly in a way that said everything. Samantha turned to her computer before irritation could surface. Her email inbox flooded with campaign deadlines, brand reviews, and meeting reminders. She focused on work, letting the rhythm of tasks steady her thoughts. At noon, her phone buzzed. Ethan. Did you eat? She smiled. About to. Good. A second message arrived. There's a food truck on Peachtree. Try the grilled chicken wrap. She blinked. How do you know where I am right now? 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Lucky guess. She shook her head, smiling despite herself. Across town, Ethan stepped through a construction gate. Workers moved around him, hauling materials and adjusting scaffolding. A foreman approached, removing his helmet. Morning, the man said, lowering his voice. They're asking when you'll return to the office. Ethan glanced at the skeletal frame rising above them. Not yet. They're getting impatient. They can wait. The foreman nodded, then handed him a tablet displaying site plans. Ethan studied them with focused intensity, his finger tracing structural lines, foundation depth, drainage channels, the invisible bones of future towers. A black SUV rolled to a stop near the gate. A man in a tailored suit stepped out, scanning the site before his eyes landed on Ethan. He approached but stopped a respectful distance away. "We need to talk," the man said. Ethan didn't look up from the plans. "Not here. The board is pushing. They always push." The man lowered his voice further. "The Centennial Skyline announcement is ready. Media partners are lined up. The mayor's office is expecting." "I said not yet," Ethan replied, finally lifting his gaze. The man fell silent. After a moment, he nodded. "Understood." He returned to the SUV and drove away. Ethan handed the tablet back to the foreman. "Increase the retaining wall depth by 8 inches. Soil reports underestimated runoff." The foreman blinked. "That'll cost more. It'll prevent flooding in 10 years. The man nodded slowly. "I'll make the change." Ethan turned and walked toward the street, blending into the movement of the city like any other worker finishing a shift. Back downtown, Samantha stepped out of the elevator at 6:15 p.m., shoulders aching, mind buzzing from meetings and subtle judgments she pretended not to hear. Outside, dusk painted the skyline in muted gold. Ethan's pickup waited at the curb. She climbed in and exhaled. "Long day." He handed her a bottle of water. "Tell me." She stared ahead for a moment. "Everyone thinks I married down." He didn't respond immediately. "How does that make you feel?" he asked. "Angry," she admitted, "and weirdly protective." He glanced at her. "Protective? They don't know you," she said. "They see a uniform and assume a life." He nodded slowly. "People see what fits their narrative." She turned toward him. "Does it bother you?" "No," he said. "It reveals more about them than me." She studied his face, searching for cracks, for hidden resentment, but found none. Instead, she found steadiness. As they drove home, city lights flickered on one by one, illuminating cranes, scaffolds, and half-finished dreams. Samantha watched the skyline glow and felt a strange certainty settle in her chest, as if she were standing at the edge of a story far larger than she understood. Beside her, Ethan drove in silence, the reflection of towering glass buildings passing across his eyes. And in his pocket, his phone vibrated again. He didn't answer. That evening, the air inside the apartment felt warmer, heavier, as if the day's unspoken tensions had followed them home and settled into the corners of the room. Samantha slipped off her shoes and dropped her bag onto the small table. "I swear," she said, rubbing her temples. "Corporate smiles are more exhausting than actual work." Ethan loosened his cuffs and hung his jacket carefully near the door. "You carry other people's expectations all day," he replied. "That's labor." She watched him for a moment. "How do you always know what to say?" "I listen," he said simply. Her stomach growled, loud enough to make them both laugh. "Okay," she said. "Before I emotionally collapse, we need food." He opened the refrigerator. Inside sat neatly stacked containers and fresh vegetables arranged with quiet precision. "You prepped meals?" she asked, surprised. "It's cheaper," he said, "and healthier." She leaned against the counter, watching him chop peppers with steady rhythm. "You are full of unexpected talents." He glanced up, disappointed. "Deeply," she said, smiling. "I was hoping for instant noodles and chaos." They ate at the small table, knees occasionally brushing. The simplicity of the moment felt grounding after a day filled with subtle judgment and corporate tension. Halfway through the meal, Ethan's phone buzzed on the counter. He ignored it. It buzzed again. Samantha looked up. "You should get that. It can wait." Another buzz. She raised an eyebrow. Persistent. He sighed, stood, and checked the screen. His expression shifted. Not panic, not worry, but alertness. "I need to take this," he said quietly. He stepped onto the small balcony and slid the door closed behind him. Samantha watched through the glass. His posture straightened, shoulders firm, voice low and controlled. He wasn't speaking like a gardener discussing weekend shifts. He spoke like someone accustomed to being heard. After a minute, he ended the call and remained still, staring out toward the glowing skyline. When he returned inside, his expression had softened back into calm. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yes." She studied him. "Work emergency?" "Something like that." He resumed eating, but Samantha felt a question settle into the space between them. Later, they sat on the couch, the muted hum of a late-night news broadcast filling the background. Images of new developments, housing debates, and rising property prices flashed across the screen. "Another mixed-use luxury complex announced for Midtown," the anchor said. "Critics argue the development may accelerate displacement in historic neighborhoods." Samantha leaned forward. "That's what you were talking about this morning." Ethan nodded slightly. "Growth without planning creates fractures." She turned to him. "You care a lot about this." He didn't answer right away. "My mother grew up in a neighborhood that no longer exists," he said finally. "Progress erased it." Her voice softened.
I'm sorry.
He shrugged faintly. "Cities forget the people who built them." Silence settled between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was reflective. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. "Denise, girls' night tomorrow. You're coming."
No excuses.
"And we're meeting your mysterious husband soon." Samantha groaned. "Interrogation night." Ethan smiled slightly. "I'll prepare my answers." She nudged him with her shoulder. "You're not helping." The next evening, Samantha sat at a restaurant table surrounded by coworkers, the air buzzing with conversation and the clinking of glasses. The restaurant overlooked a busy street lined with neon lights and construction barriers, a city constantly reshaping itself. Denise leaned in. "So when do we meet him?" "You will," Samantha said, taking a sip of water. "Eventually." A coworker across the table tilted her head. "Is it true he does landscaping for those mega mansions in Buckhead?" "He manages properties," Samantha said carefully. "Must be interesting seeing how the rich live," another added. Samantha forced a polite smile. "He notices soil quality more than marble floors." Laughter rippled around the table, but the undertone lingered. Her phone buzzed. "Ethan, outside." She blinked. "Excuse me." She stepped out onto the sidewalk and spotted his pickup parked near the curb. He leaned against the door, hands in his pockets, city lights reflecting faintly in his eyes. "You didn't have to come," she said, surprised. "You sounded overwhelmed," he replied. Her chest tightened. "You could sense that through text?" "You used only 3 words," he said. She laughed softly and stepped closer. "Come meet them." He hesitated. "Just for a minute," she added. Inside, conversations paused as they approached the table. "This is Ethan," Samantha said. He nodded politely. "Nice to meet you." Denise smiled brightly. "We've heard so much about you." "I hope not too much," he replied. A coworker gestured toward the window. "So you work on those big estates north of the city?" "Yes." "That must be wild. All that wealth." He met her gaze evenly. "Wealth looks different depending on where you stand." The table fell quiet for a beat. Denise cleared her throat. "So how did you two meet?" Samantha smiled. "He was planting a tree," Ethan added. She was the only person who stopped to ask why. Denise softened. "That's actually really sweet." After a few minutes, Ethan excused himself, sensing Samantha's growing discomfort. Outside, she joined him near the truck. "You handled that well," she said. "They're protective of you," he replied. "They're judgmental. Both can exist at once." She leaned against the door beside him, watching traffic stream past. "Do you ever feel like you're living 2 lives?" she asked suddenly. He didn't respond. She looked at him. "There's the version of me at work, the version my parents expect, and then the version that feels real when I'm with you. He stared at the city lights. Most people never meet their real selves. She studied his face. And you? He hesitated just long enough to be noticeable. I'm working on it. As they drove home, a sudden burst of sirens cut through the night. Police cars sped past, lights flashing blue and red across storefront windows. Traffic slowed. Ahead, floodlights illuminated a construction site surrounded by caution tape. Workers and officials stood near the entrance, voices raised in urgent discussion. Ethan's grip tightened on the steering wheel. What happened? Samantha asked. He leaned forward slightly, studying the site with sharp focus. Structural collapse, he murmured. Even from the road, the twisted metal and broken framework were visible. A section of scaffolding had failed, sending debris crashing down. Emergency responders moved quickly, their radios crackling. Samantha felt a chill. Was anyone hurt? I don't know, he said quietly. His jaw tightened, eyes fixed on the wreckage. She looked at him. You sound like you know this site. He didn't answer immediately. Traffic began moving again. He drove forward, but his gaze remained in the rearview mirror long after the flashing lights disappeared behind them. Back at the apartment, he stepped onto the balcony almost immediately, dialing his phone with controlled urgency. Samantha stood inside, watching through the glass again. How did the supports fail? He said, voice low but sharp. A pause.
No.
That inspection report was signed. Another pause. His expression hardened. Shut it down until I review everything personally. He ended the call and remained still, hands braced on the railing, the city stretching before him in layers of light and shadow. Inside, Samantha felt the weight of a realization pressing at the edges of her mind. This was not a man whose job ended at sunset. This was not a man disconnected from the forces shaping the skyline. And as he stood silhouetted against the glowing towers, she felt, for the first time, that she was looking at someone she did not fully know. Ethan remained on the balcony long after the city quieted, watching the horizon like a man guarding something vast and unfinished. The apartment was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant echo of traffic drifting up from the street below. Samantha stood near the sliding glass door, watching Ethan's silhouette against the city lights. He hadn't moved in several minutes, one hand braced on the balcony railing, the other resting at his side as if holding back thoughts too heavy to release. When he finally stepped inside, his expression had settled into calm again, but the air between them felt altered. Bad night at work? She asked gently. He removed his shoes and set them neatly by the door. Something failed that shouldn't have. That construction site? She pressed. He paused. Yes. She studied him. You sounded responsible. He met her gaze. When something collapses, someone is responsible. That answer didn't satisfy her, but she sensed the boundary in his tone and chose not to push further. They prepared for bed in near silence. When he lay beside her, she rested her head against his shoulder, listening to his breathing gradually slow. Yet long after his breaths deepened, her mind stayed awake, replaying flashing lights, urgent phone calls, and the way he had said shut it down with quiet authority. Sometime after midnight, his phone vibrated on the nightstand. He reached for it instantly, careful not to wake her, but she was already awake. I have to go check something, he whispered. She pushed herself up on one elbow. Now? It'll be quick. Rain had begun again, tapping softly against the window as he dressed in the dim light. He moved quietly, efficiently, like someone accustomed to leaving without disturbing anyone. At the door, he hesitated. I'll lock up behind you, she murmured. He nodded once, then stepped into the hallway. Samantha listened to his footsteps fade down the stairwell before the building settled back into stillness. She walked to the window and watched his pickup pull out of the lot and disappear into the wet glow of streetlights. A knot tightened in her chest. He hadn't said where he was going. Across town, floodlights still illuminated the damaged construction site. Yellow caution tape fluttered in the damp wind. Security vehicles idled near the entrance. Ethan stepped out of his truck and approached the barricade. A security guard straightened immediately. "Sir," the guard said, lifting the tape. Inside, the skeletal structure loomed overhead, twisted metal casting jagged shadows across wet concrete. A cluster of engineers stood near a portable light tower, their voices low and tense. One of them turned. "You got here fast." Ethan's eyes moved over the damage with clinical focus. "Report. Temporary support beams failed," the engineer said. "Inspection passed last week. We're still verifying load distribution." Ethan crouched, running his fingers over a fractured joint. Rainwater pooled in shallow grooves, reflecting the glare of the lights. "Who signed the materials approval?" he asked. The engineer hesitated. "Procurement cleared it." "Names?" Ethan said. No raised voice.
No visible anger.
Just quiet authority. A tablet was handed to him. He scrolled through documents, jaw tightening slightly. "Shut the site down," he said. "Full review. No press statements." "The media already caught wind," another engineer warned. Ethan stood. "Then they'll hear we prioritize safety over schedule." The men nodded. By the time he returned home, dawn was beginning to soften the edges of the sky. Samantha sat curled on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, a mug of untouched tea cooling on the table. "You didn't sleep," he observed. She looked up. "Neither did you." He set his keys down. "It's handled." She searched his face. "Are you in trouble?" A faint crease appeared between his brows.
No.
"You left in the middle of the night, went to a restricted site, and gave orders like a project director," she said quietly. "Help me understand." He sat across from her, forearms resting on his knees. "I oversee multiple crews," he said. "Sometimes that means being present." "That's more than landscaping," she replied. A silence stretched between them. "I never lied to you," he said. She absorbed that carefully. "You just didn't tell me everything." He didn't respond. She exhaled slowly. "Okay." The answer surprised them both. "You're not going to push?" he asked. "I will," she said. "When you're ready to tell me." Something in his expression shifted. Not relief, not exactly gratitude, but recognition. Later that morning, Samantha arrived at work exhausted, her thoughts drifting between concern and curiosity. News alerts flickered across office screens. Construction incident in Midtown site closed pending review. Denise leaned over her cubicle wall. "Did you see this? That new development downtown had a structural issue overnight." Samantha forced a neutral tone. "Is anyone hurt?" "No injuries reported," Denise said. "Still, that's a huge project."
Delay coste millions. Millions.
The word lingered in Samantha's mind. At lunch, she stepped outside, needing air. Across the street, a fenced lot displayed a glossy rendering of a future skyline tower. Centennial Skyline Residences, reimagining urban living. She stared at the image: glass balconies, rooftop gardens, landscape terraces cascading down multiple levels. A small plaque listed the developer, Cole Urban Development. Her pulse stumbled. Cole. She stared closer, as if the letters might rearrange themselves into something less unsettling. Her phone buzzed. "Ethan, did you get some rest?" She looked from the sign to the message. Trying to, she typed back. Her fingers hovered, then added, "Drive safe today." 3 dots appeared. Always. That evening, Samantha returned home earlier than usual. The apartment felt still, the quiet stretching long enough to amplify every small sound. The tick of the wall clock, footsteps in the hallway, a car passing below. She walked to the bookshelf and ran her fingers along the binders she had noticed before. One was labeled Soil Stability Reports. Another, Zoning Amendments, Fulton County. She hesitated, then opened one. Inside were detailed maps, engineering notes, and development timelines marked with precise annotations. This was not hobby reading. Footsteps sounded in the hallway outside. She quickly returned the binder and stepped away just as the door opened. Ethan entered carrying groceries, rainwater darkening the shoulders of his jacket. "You're home early," he said. "So are you." He set the bags on the counter. "They released us once the review team arrived." She watched him unpack vegetables, bread, and a small bouquet of fresh flowers. "You bought flowers?" she asked softly. "They were discounted," he said. "And you look tired this morning." Emotion tightened her throat unexpectedly. She placed the flowers in a glass jar while he prepared dinner. The quiet domestic rhythm steadied her racing thoughts. But the image of the sign across from her office remained burned into her mind. Cole Urban Development. At dinner, she spoke casually. "There's a big project downtown. Centennial Skyline Residences." His fork paused for a fraction of a second. "I've seen the signs," he said. "Looks expensive. Most new developments are." She studied him, searching for cracks, hints, anything. He continued eating, composed. She felt the weight of a question pressing against her ribs. But instead of asking, she said softly, "I'm proud of you." He looked up, surprised. "For what?" "For being someone who shows up when things fall apart." His gaze held hers for a long moment. Outside, the city pulsed with motion. Cranes shifting, traffic flowing, lights blinking in high-rise windows. Inside, Samantha sensed the ground beneath her life shifting in ways she could not yet name. And somewhere beyond the apartment walls, decisions were being made, reports reviewed, and deadlines recalculated. All orbiting a man who still woke before sunrise to make coffee in a modest kitchen. She lay awake that night listening to the rain fade and the city breathe, feeling that she stood at the edge of a truth moving steadily toward her. She did not yet know whether it would break her heart or expand it beyond anything she had imagined. The next morning arrived wrapped in a thin gray mist that clung to the edges of buildings and softened the sharp outlines of the skyline. Samantha stood at the kitchen counter stirring her coffee long after the sugar had dissolved, her thoughts drifting back to the development sign across from her office and the name that refused to leave her mind. Cole. Ethan moved around the kitchen with his usual quiet efficiency, packing a container of cut fruit into her lunch bag. "You've stirred that for 2 minutes, he observed. She blinked. "Have I?" He slid the lunch bag toward her. "Something on your mind?" She hesitated. "Just work." He studied her for a beat longer than usual, then nodded. "Try to step outside at lunch. Fresh air helps." She gave a faint smile. "Yes, doctor." As they left the apartment, the morning air felt damp and cool. A black SUV idled at the corner again. Samantha noticed it before Ethan did, or before he pretended to. "Do you really not see those?" she asked. He followed her gaze briefly. "City traffic." She frowned. "That's not traffic. That's a pattern." He met her eyes. "You're observant." "That's not an answer." He opened her door. "You'll be late." She slid into the seat, the question lingering between them. Downtown was already buzzing when they arrived. As Samantha crossed the street toward her office, she glanced again at the glossy construction rendering. Morning light glinted off the printed glass towers. Centennial Skyline Residences. Cole Urban Development. The name felt heavier today. Inside, Denise intercepted her near the elevator. "You look like you slept in a conference room," Denise said. "Close," Samantha replied. Denise lowered her voice. "So guess what? That Midtown site collapse? My cousin works in permitting. The developer shut everything down voluntarily. No legal pressure." "That's unusual?" Samantha asked. "Developers don't stop projects unless they're forced to. Delays cost a fortune." Samantha's pulse quickened. "Who's the developer?" Denise continued. "Some company called Cole Urban Development. Ever heard of them?" Samantha forced her face neutral.
No.
Denise shook her head. "They're huge. Own half the new skyline, apparently. Whoever runs it must be terrifying." Samantha managed a small laugh, but her chest felt tight. At noon, she stepped outside, drawn again to the sign. Workers in hard hats moved behind fencing, though most activity appeared paused. A temporary banner now read, "Site closed for safety review." A man beside her spoke. "Beautiful design, isn't it?" She turned. An older gentleman in a charcoal coat studied the rendering. "It is," she replied. "Ambitious," he added. "But that developer, they're different." "How so?" she asked. "They incorporate green terraces and community spaces into luxury builds. Expensive, yes, but thoughtful. Not common in this market." He nodded toward the image, then walked away, leaving Samantha staring at the layered gardens cascading down the tower's facade. That evening, traffic crawled along Peachtree Street, brake lights stretching into red ribbons ahead of them. Samantha rested her elbow against the window, watching pedestrians hurry along sidewalks, their reflections shimmering in glass storefronts. "Do you ever wish things were simpler?" she asked. "They are simple," Ethan replied. She looked at him. "Not secrets. Not late-night site visits. Not SUVs that recognize you." He kept his eyes on the road. "Some complexities protect what matters." "That sounds like something you practiced saying." A faint smile touched his lips. "Maybe." They drove in silence for several blocks before he spoke again. "I grew up watching people lose their homes because decisions were made in rooms they would never enter," he said. "Power concentrates in quiet places." She listened, sensing the deeper current beneath his words. "And you?" she asked softly. "I prefer to understand the rooms before I walk into them." That night, Samantha couldn't focus on television or emails or even the novel on her nightstand. The questions circling her mind felt too large to ignore. When Ethan stepped into the shower, she stared at his phone resting on the table. "Don't," she told herself. "Trust." But the unanswered spaces in his life pressed against her resolve. She turned away. Moments later, his phone buzzed. The screen lit up. Harrison, bored. Her breath caught. Another buzz. Mayor's office liaison. A third notification appeared. Centennial Skyline Media Schedule Draft. Her pulse roared in her ears. The bathroom water shut off. She stepped away from the table just as the door opened and steam drifted into the room. Ethan dried his hair with a towel, unaware of how close she had come to crossing a line. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded quickly. "Just tired." He studied her face, then nodded. Later that night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling while the city hummed beyond the window. Bored. Mayor's office. Media schedule. The pieces were assembling themselves whether she wanted them to or not. The next afternoon, Samantha's boss stopped by her desk. "Samantha, we may be pitching for a contract tied to the Centennial Skyline development," he said. "Major exposure. If we land it, it changes our portfolio." Her throat tightened. "Who's the client contact?" "Cole Urban Development," he replied. "Their executive team is notoriously private. No public interviews. No profiles. Just statements." He leaned closer. "If you hear anything about them through your husband's work in landscaping those estates, let me know. Information is leverage." She forced a professional smile. "Of course." But inside, her heart pounded so hard she could barely hear the rest of the conversation. That evening, rain returned, soft at first, then steady. Samantha sat at the table while Ethan prepared dinner, the sound of water tapping the windows filling the quiet. "Did you ever want something you were afraid to ask for?" she said suddenly. He turned off the stove. "Yes." "What did you do?" "I waited until fear wasn't the loudest voice." She swallowed. "And if waiting risks losing the chance?" He set 2 plates on the table and sat across from her. "Then you decide which loss you can live with." Her eyes stung unexpectedly. He reached across the table and took her hand. "You don't have to carry questions alone," he said. She looked at their hands, then back at him. "Who are you, Ethan?" she whispered. The rain intensified against the windows. He didn't pull his hand away, but he didn't answer. Instead, he said quietly, "I'm the man who loves you." Emotion rose in her throat. tangled with frustration and fear and something dangerously close to understanding. Outside, thunder rolled low across the city. Inside, the distance between truth and revelation grew thinner with every passing hour. And neither of them slept much that night. By Thursday morning, the tension between what Samantha knew and what she didn't know felt like a taut wire stretched through her chest. She moved through her routine with mechanical precision. Shower, coffee, blazer, laptop. But her thoughts remained fixed on glowing phone notifications, construction fences, and the quiet authority in Ethan's voice when he believed no one was listening. Ethan noticed. He noticed the way she stared at nothing while tying her shoes, the way she forgot to sip her coffee, the way her answers came half a beat too late. "You're carrying something heavy," he said gently as they stood by the door. She forced a small smile. "Deadlines." He didn't challenge the lie. Instead, he brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch steady and grounding. "Don't let the world harden you," he said. She held his gaze. "Don't shut me out." Something flickered behind his eyes. Conflict, restraint, maybe fear, but he only nodded. Traffic downtown was thicker than usual. News vans lined the curb near the Midtown site, their satellite dishes angled toward the gray sky. Samantha spotted them as they passed. "Media's there already," she murmured. "They move fast," Ethan replied. She watched his reflection in the windshield. "They move when the story matters," she said. He didn't respond. At her office, energy buzzed through the marketing floor. People huddled near screens, murmuring about contracts, safety reviews, and shifting deadlines. Denise rushed up to her. "Big news, the Centennial Skyline launch event is still happening next week. They're calling it a commitment to transparency and safety." "That's bold," Samantha said. Denise lowered her voice. "My cousin says the developer insisted the announcement proceed. Claims public trust is built through accountability." Samantha felt a chill move through her. Insisted. At noon, she stepped outside and found herself walking toward the fence site again. The twisted metal had been cleared, replaced by neat stacks of materials and temporary supports. Workers moved with controlled urgency, as if the project had shifted from routine construction to something more deliberate. A man in a navy suit stood near the entrance, speaking with a site supervisor. Even from a distance, Samantha recognized the posture. Composed, efficient, accustomed to authority. Her heart stumbled, but when the man turned, he wasn't Ethan. Relief and disappointment collided in her chest. That evening, she arrived home before Ethan. The apartment felt still, the quiet amplifying every thought she had tried to suppress all day. She paced once across the living room, then stopped in front of the bookshelf again. This time, she didn't hesitate. She pulled a binder free and opened it on the table. Detailed zoning overlays, environmental impact summaries, land acquisition schedules, handwritten notes in Ethan's precise script. She turned a page. A letterhead caught her breath. Cole Urban Development, Internal Planning Draft. Her pulse roared in her ears. She flipped to another page. Signature authorization line E. Cole. Her hands trembled. The front door opened. She snapped the binder closed, heart racing. Ethan stepped inside carrying a paper bag and paused when he saw her standing stiffly beside the table. "You're home early," he said. "So are you." He set the bag down slowly, his eyes moving to the binder and back to her face. Silence filled the room like rising water. "You read it," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Samantha's throat tightened. "I opened it." He nodded once, absorbing the truth of the moment. "I wasn't looking for it," she continued, "but it was there. And so were the plans. And the signatures. And the name." Rain began tapping softly against the windows again. "Say something," she whispered. He removed his jacket and set it carefully over a chair, buying himself a few seconds that felt like entire years. Then he met her eyes. "My full name is Ethan Cole," he said. Her breath caught. "I founded Cole Urban Development 12 years ago." The words seemed to rearrange the air in the room. You're, her voice faltered. You're the developer. Yes. Her hand moved to the back of a chair for support. The skyscrapers, she said faintly. Yes. The Centennial Skyline project. Yes. Emotion surged. Shock, anger, relief, disbelief, and an unexpected thread of hurt. You let me believe you were struggling to make rent, she said. I let you see my life without the noise attached to my name, he replied. That's not the same thing. Her voice cracked, the first tear sliding down her cheek before she realized she was crying. I watched my parents worry, she continued. I defended you. I defended us. He stepped closer but stopped when she raised a hand. Please don't, she whispered. Pain flickered across his face. I never wanted to deceive you, he said. I wanted to meet someone who wasn't meeting my balance sheet. I'm not someone, Ethan, she said, tears blurring her vision. I'm your wife. Silence pressed in around them. I was engaged once, he said quietly. When a project collapsed during the recession, she left within a week. Said she hadn't signed up for uncertainty. Samantha's breathing slowed, but the hurt remained sharp. Partners betrayed me, he continued. Investors tried to force control. Every relationship became a negotiation. Every conversation had a price. He swallowed. So I stepped away from the executive office. I worked on sites personally. I let people assume what they wanted. And I waited to meet someone who asked about trees instead of square footage. Tears slipped down Samantha's face unchecked. You should have told me, she said. I wanted to, he admitted. Every day. But the longer I waited, the harder it became. And the more I feared you'd feel tested. She sank into a chair, overwhelmed. Were you testing me? No, he said firmly. I was protecting the only part of my life that felt real. Rain intensified against the windows, filling the silence with a steady rhythm. After a long moment, she asked quietly, Does everyone know? The board, the city, people who need to. And my husband is one of the most powerful developers in Atlanta, she whispered, still trying to grasp it. He crouched in front of her, careful not to touch her without permission. My name carries influence, he said, but it also carries enemies, expectations, and noise. With you, I wanted truth. She searched his face. The man who made her coffee, who packed her lunch, who listened more than he spoke. The man who commanded multimillion-dollar projects with a single sentence. I don't know what to feel, she admitted. That's fair.
I'm angry.
You have that right. I'm relieved you're not in danger. A faint, sad smile touched his lips.
I'm glad.
She let out a shaky breath. And I still love you, which is the most confusing part. Emotion moved through his eyes like a storm breaking. I love you, he said. They sat in silence while rain blurred the city lights beyond the glass. Finally, she asked, What happens now? He exhaled slowly. That depends, he said, on whether you can live with the truth. Outside, thunder rolled low across the skyline, echoing between steel and glass towers rising toward the clouds. Inside the apartment, the life Samantha thought she understood had shifted irrevocably. Not shattered, but expanded into something vast and unfamiliar. And for the first time since the courthouse wedding, she realized the world had not grown smaller around her choices. It had grown immeasurably larger. The rain didn't stop that night. It softened to a steady rhythm, like the city itself was holding its breath. Samantha sat at the small kitchen table long after Ethan had made tea. Neither of them drank. The truth hovered between them, heavy, undeniable, irreversible. You should have trusted me, she said finally, her voice steadier now but still fragile. I was afraid, Ethan admitted. Of me. Of losing the one place I wasn't a headline. She looked at him. You didn't give me the chance to choose you fully. He absorbed that without defense. You're right, he said quietly. Silence settled again. Why now? She asked. Why were you still hiding it? We're married. I plan to tell you after the Centennial Skyline launch, he said. I didn't want the collapse to distort the moment. She let out a small disbelieving laugh. You were waiting for a better PR window? No, he said firmly. I was waiting for stability. She stood and walked to the balcony, sliding the door open despite the damp air. The skyline shimmered under rain, cranes frozen mid-swing, glass towers reflecting red aviation lights. He joined her, but this time he stayed a step behind. You built half of that, she said softly. Not alone. But your name is on it. Yes. She wrapped her arms around herself. Do you know what it feels like to find out your husband runs board meetings with the mayor's office? I can imagine it's overwhelming. It feels like I married a stranger, she said. His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. She turned to face him. Did you ever doubt me?
No.
Then why assume I'd leave? He met her eyes fully. Because history taught me to. Emotion flickered across her face. Anger dissolving into understanding, she wasn't ready to offer completely. Inside, his phone buzzed. He didn't move. Answer it, she said. It can wait. She shook her head. This is your life. Don't pretend it isn't. He stepped inside and checked the screen. Harrison, he said. Board chair. Put it on speaker, she replied. He hesitated. Please, she added. He answered. Ethan. Harrison's voice came through, sharp and controlled. Media inquiries are escalating. The mayor wants confirmation you'll speak at the launch. I will, Ethan said evenly. And your wife? Harrison asked. Is she prepared for exposure? Samantha's breath caught. She's not a talking point, Ethan replied, voice cooling. There was a pause. Understood, Harrison said. But once this goes public, anonymity ends.
I'm aware.
The call ended. Samantha stared at him. Exposure? She repeated. Once my personal life is linked publicly, you'll be visible. She laughed bitterly. I already am, just not in the way I thought. He stepped closer. I never wanted this to feel like a trap. Then don't make decisions alone anymore, she said. He nodded once. The next morning, headlines splashed across news apps. Centennial Skyline developer to address safety concerns at launch event. At work, Samantha's boss called her into his office. You're married to Ethan Cole? He asked bluntly. Her pulse thundered. Yes. He leaned back, stunned. You realize your husband controls the largest private development portfolio in the city? Yes. Why didn't you say anything? She held his gaze. Because it wasn't public. He exhaled slowly. Well, it will be, and we are absolutely pitching for that contract. She left his office feeling like the ground beneath her career had shifted overnight. At lunch, Denise cornered her. Tell me this isn't the same Ethan Cole, Denise said, phone in hand displaying a business profile photo. Clean-cut, suited, composed. Samantha stared at the image. It was him, younger, sharper, public. It's him, she said quietly. Denise's mouth fell open. You married a billionaire and didn't tell us? He's not a billionaire, Samantha said automatically. Denise blinked. That's the detail you're correcting? Samantha walked away before she had to answer more. That evening, black SUVs no longer idled discreetly at corners. They parked openly near the apartment building. Security stepped out when Ethan arrived home, nodding respectfully. Samantha watched from the window as he stepped out of one SUV instead of his pickup. When he entered, she crossed her arms. New car? She asked. Temporary, he replied. Advisors insisted. She studied him. Tailored coat, polished shoes, the weight of visibility settling onto his shoulders like armor. Is this who you are? She asked. It's part of it. And the man who packs my lunch? That's who I choose to be. Emotion swelled in her chest again. But this time it wasn't anger. It was fear of being pulled into a current stronger than she anticipated. The launch is in 4 days, he said gently. After that, nothing will be hidden. She nodded slowly. "Do you want me there?" she asked. He stepped closer. "I want you beside me." The day of the launch arrived wrapped in sunlight that made the skyline gleam like polished steel. Security lines stretched outside a rooftop venue overlooking downtown Atlanta. Cameras flashed as city officials and investors mingled beneath white canopies. Samantha stood in front of the mirror adjusting a simple navy dress, her hands trembling slightly. Ethan approached from behind, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that fit him like it had been designed for moments like this. "You don't have to do this," he said softly. She met his reflection in the mirror. "I married you in a storm," she replied. "I can stand with you in sunlight." He smiled faintly. Downstairs, reporters gathered near the stage. A banner behind the podium displayed the sleek rendering of Centennial Skyline. Cole Urban Development. Harrison approached them near the entrance. "It's time." Ethan offered his arm. Samantha hesitated only a second before taking it. As they stepped into view, murmurs rippled through the crowd. Cameras pivoted. Flashes ignited. "Is that his wife? When did he get married? She looks normal." Samantha kept her chin lifted, her pulse racing but her posture steady. Ethan guided her to the front row before stepping onto the stage. He adjusted the microphone, scanning the crowd once before his gaze found hers. For a brief moment, the noise faded. He began speaking about safety, accountability, community investment, long-term responsibility. His voice was calm, assured, resonating with conviction rather than rehearsed performance. When he finished addressing the collapse, he paused. "There's one more thing," he said. The crowd leaned in. "For years, I kept my personal life private, not out of secrecy, but out of protection." Samantha's breath caught. "I believed power should shield what matters most," he continued. "But I've learned that transparency builds trust, in business and in life." He extended his hand toward her. Samantha's heart pounded as she rose and joined him on stage. Cameras exploded in flashes. "This is my wife, Samantha Cole," he said. "The woman who chose me before headlines ever could." Applause swelled. Emotion rose unexpectedly in her throat. He turned slightly toward her, voice softer now but still audible through the microphone. "She didn't marry a developer. She married a man who plants trees." The crowd laughed lightly. "And she reminds me every day why we build cities. Not for profit, but for people." Samantha squeezed his hand, feeling the weight of every gaze and every assumption shift in that single moment. The skyline stretched behind them, glass towers reflecting sunlight in brilliant shards. But for the first time since the courthouse wedding, the world didn't feel divided between truth and illusion. It felt aligned. As applause continued, Samantha realized something unexpected. She wasn't standing beside a stranger. She was standing beside the same man who made coffee in a small kitchen, who listened more than he spoke, who showed up when things collapsed. Only now the world could see him too. And this time, she was choosing him with full knowledge of the skyline he carried on his shoulders. Applause echoed long after Ethan lowered the microphone. The sound rolled across the rooftop like distant thunder, blending with the hum of traffic far below. Samantha stood beside him, her hands still wrapped in his, feeling the tremor of the moment settle into something real. Cameras flashed again. Reporters leaned forward, voices overlapping. "Mr. Cole, did your wife know about your holdings before the marriage?" "Samantha, how does it feel discovering your husband is one of the most powerful developers in the city? Is this announcement an attempt to improve public trust after the collapse?" Security shifted subtly, forming a respectful boundary, but Ethan didn't step away. Instead, he guided Samantha toward the press line. "If we don't speak now," he murmured, "they'll invent their own answers." She swallowed and nodded. A reporter raised her microphone. "Mrs. Cole, did you feel deceived?" Samantha felt the weight of 1,000 assumptions pressing in. She thought about the courthouse rain, the pickup truck, the small kitchen table, the quiet laughter over burnt toast. "I felt surprised," she answered honestly. but not deceived. Pens paused mid-scratch. Why not? Another reporter asked. Because the man I married never pretended to be anything he wasn't, she said. He just didn't tell the whole story yet. Murmurs rippled through the press line. Ethan looked at her with quiet gratitude. Another voice called out, "Are you prepared for the public scrutiny that comes with his position?" Samantha took a breath. I married a person, not a spotlight. But I'm learning that sometimes love means standing in light you didn't choose. There was a pause, not awkward, but reflective. The questions shifted toward construction reforms, community safety, and project oversight. Ethan answered with clarity and accountability, outlining new safety audits, independent inspections, and a relief fund for displaced tenants. Samantha listened, watching the man she loved navigate pressure with composure and responsibility. This wasn't performance. It was stewardship. When the press conference ended, Harrison approached with visible relief. That went better than we hoped. Ethan nodded. Transparency usually does. Harrison turned to Samantha. You were remarkable. She gave a small smile. I was terrified. That's often when courage shows up, Harrison replied before stepping away. As the crowd thinned, city officials approached to shake Ethan's hand. A councilwoman thanked him for committing additional funds to housing stabilization. A neighborhood organizer expressed cautious optimism. Conversations formed small circles around them, each one a thread in the fabric of the city Ethan helped shape. Samantha watched it all, absorbing the scale of his world. Not the wealth, but the responsibility. Eventually, they slipped away to the quieter edge of the rooftop. The sun had begun its descent, painting the glass towers in amber light. Are you okay? He asked gently. She exhaled slowly. I think I just lived 3 different lives in 1 week. He gave a soft laugh. I'm sorry it unfolded like this. She turned to him. I'm not sorry. I just needed the truth to catch up with my heart. He brushed his thumb lightly across her knuckles. And now, she said, looking out at the skyline. I understand why you wanted something real. He followed her gaze. Steel and glass are easy. Trust is harder to build. They stood in silence for a moment, the wind tugging softly at her hair. Will things ever be normal again? She asked. He thought carefully before answering. Not the way they were. She nodded. But they can be honest, he added. She leaned into him slightly. That sounds better. Over the following weeks, life reshaped itself in ways neither of them could fully predict. Security remained, though less conspicuous. The black SUVs came and went, but Ethan still insisted on driving the pickup whenever possible. Samantha returned to work under a new kind of attention. Colleagues watched her with curiosity instead of casual familiarity. Some treated her with sudden deference, others with thinly veiled skepticism. One afternoon, Denise slid into the chair across from her desk. So, Denise said, lowering her voice, has your life turned into a luxury magazine spread yet? Samantha laughed.
No.
But I did attend a zoning meeting last night. Denise blinked. That sounds aggressively unglamorous. It was, Samantha said, and strangely important. She realized she was beginning to see the city differently, not just as buildings and streets, but as decisions, trade-offs, and communities impacted by each development. At home, evenings remained sacred. Ethan cooked when he could. Samantha teased him about overwatering the balcony plants. They argued about whether the couch needed replacing. They learned how to talk through decisions rather than around them. One night, as they washed dishes together, Samantha asked, Do you miss being anonymous? He considered. Sometimes, but anonymity can also be a form of hiding. She nudged him with her elbow. You're done hiding now. Yes, he said, meeting her eyes. I am. Months later, the Centennial Skyline project resumed construction under new safety oversight. Community forums invited residents to review plans and voice concerns. Ethan attended each session personally, listening more than he spoke. At one meeting, a tenant displaced by the collapse stood and said, Developers usually disappear when things go wrong. You didn't. Ethan replied simply, because you live with the consequences of what we build. Samantha watched from the back row, pride swelling quietly in her chest. Spring arrived with soft breezes and flowering trees lining the streets Ethan once walked anonymously in a work jacket. On a Saturday morning, Samantha joined him at a community park where volunteers planted new saplings. Children ran between shovels and watering cans, their laughter filling the air. A little boy tugged Ethan's sleeve. "Mister, are you the tree boss?" Ethan smiled. "Something like that." Samantha laughed, snapping a photo as he knelt to help the child steady a young oak. As they walked home later, dirt still on their hands, Samantha said, "I like this version of your empire." He glanced at her. "Trees grow slower than skyscrapers. But they last longer," she said. He squeezed her hand. They reached their building just as the evening light softened the city into gold. For a moment, they stood on the sidewalk looking up, not at wealth or status, but at the layered lives contained within every window. "Do you ever think about what people assume when they see us?" she asked. "All the time," he admitted. "And does it matter?" He looked at her, really looked. "Not nearly as much as what's true." She rested her head briefly against his shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. The man she married still planted trees. He still listened before speaking. He still chose simplicity when the world expected grandeur. Only now, she understood the full landscape of the life they were building. Not hidden, not divided, but shared. And in that shared truth, she found something stronger than the shock that once threatened to divide them. She found partnership. She found purpose. She found love that did not shrink in the presence of power, but reshaped it into something humane. As they entered the building together, the city lights flickered on one by one, illuminating streets, windows, and lives intersecting in quiet, unseen ways. Above them, the skyline rose, steel, glass, and ambition. Beside her, Ethan carried none of the distance she once feared. Only presence. Only honesty. Only the quiet promise that what they built from here forward would stand on a foundation stronger than secrets. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you that truth, trust, and love can transform even the most unexpected lives, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support helps bring more powerful stories like this to life. Because sometimes, the greatest revelations aren't about wealth or status, but about discovering the true heart of the person standing beside you.